The past year in the coronavirus pandemic has revealed many things about our society, including how wildly out of step our budgetary priorities are with the actual crises facing the American people. Joining us now to discuss is one of the fiercest voices out there, co-founder of CODEPINK, author and activist, Medea Benjamin. Welcome to the show, Medea. It's so great to have you.
So nice to be on with you.
Of course. So just tell us a little bit about that thought, what some of the learnings that we should be taking from the past year of dealing with the pandemic are.
I think it's very clear to the American people right now that our biggest threat is not terrorism overseas, but it's terrorists here at home. And of course, the pandemic as the number one threat to the American people and the lack of a healthcare system. And then there's the issues of the recession brought on by COVID and the staggering global inequalities that we face and all of the conflict that comes as a result of that. None of these are things that the Pentagon can deal with. And let's also remember, and I don't know, Crystal, how much the American people realize this, the astounding failure of our military in basically everything it's gotten involved in since 9/11, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan, Libya, supporting the Saudis in the devastating war in Yemen, no peace in Israel-Palestine. Everything has really been a tremendous failure. So why do we keep pouring massive amounts of money into a military that doesn't succeed in what it sets out to do, even if we're against the goals of overthrowing other governments, and doesn't deal with the crises that we're really facing?
Yeah. Well, and on that point, I mean, we had one of the most manifest failures in that regard right on our own doorstep here, where with all of our national security state spending, they couldn't prevent a few thousand rioters from storming the Capitol here back on January 6th. What does that tell us? And, answer that question of why do we spend so much money on the military if ultimately all we've really gotten out of it is these kinds of failures?
These kind of failures, plus we have the terrible white nationalism within the military itself that's part of the problem. And we also have the problem that we're facing of nuclear annihilation that comes from the very weapons that we've been paying for, and that under Obama, we dedicated over $1 trillion in the next 30 years to modernize. So what it says is that there's a military, industrial, congressional security complex that is unfortunately very alive and well, since we were warned about it from the time of Dwight Eisenhower in the 1960s, and that this is part of the spinning door, I would not even say revolving door, between the Pentagon, the contractors, the lobbyists, the big companies like Raytheon or Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and these corporations give a lot of money to our Congress people and into their election campaigns. And it is just this incredible cycle that we're in, where a few big corporations get very wealthy out of continuing wars. There was a meeting of the shareholders of Raytheon just last week, in which the head of the Raytheon said, well, we're a little concerned that the Biden administration has put a freeze on these weapons to Saudi Arabia, but don't worry, there's not about to have peace break out in the Middle East, so there'll still be plenty of profits to make. And this is the system that we have ourselves in right now, that we really have to unwind to go from a war economy to a peace economy.
What are some of the specific issues that you and CODEPINK have your eyes on as we, move into the Biden era now?
We think the two most urgent things that Biden must deal with is the U.S. support for the war in Yemen. I mean, that is an unbelievable catastrophe, what the people of Yemen are facing, and how it's been U.S. bombs that for years now, starting at the end of the Obama administration, but really ramping up during the Trump time, have been devastating that country's infrastructure, as well as so many civilian casualties. And Biden said that he was going to get us out of that war. Well, it should have happened on day one. It should have happened on week one. And we're still waiting for him to say that we're not going to keep supporting that war, and that he's going to roll back the designation of the Houthis in Yemen as a terrorist organization, because that hampers humanitarian aid from getting into the parts of the country that they control. And the other is going back into the Iran nuclear deal, something that Biden had promised as well. But it's disconcerting because when his Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, was testifying before Congress, he said it's a long way off, but we don't have time. We have to get back into that deal right away, or things can change on the ground very quickly, and they are changing in Iran, where the majority of the parliament, and perhaps in the upcoming elections there in June, are going to say, hey, we don't want to be in this deal with the United States and the rest of the world, because they don't keep their promises when they go into a deal and then pull out of it. So those are two immediate things.
Medea, I'd love to ask you a personal question, if you don't mind. And I have a confession as well. You know, watching your activism in the Obama years, I've sort of gone through my own political evolution, where I used to be a lot more like, oh, the Democratic Party, they have our good intentions and that they're doing the best that they can. And so I tended to, on a lot of issues, cut President Obama a lot of slack. And so I'd see you out there with your activism and causing a fuss. And I started thinking, like, come on, cut the guy some slack. You're over the top with all of this stuff. And now I've come to see things a lot more from your perspective. But I guess I'm just curious, where does you take a lot of heat from all sides because you're true to your principles, regardless of whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. That's a very tough thing to do. How do you deal with that criticism, and what are kind of the origins of your passion and commitment to this issue, which I think no matter how people feel about you, they can't certainly deny?
Well, my origins are pretty easy, which I came out of the Vietnam War days, and I saw then how my government lies, and you can't believe what they say, and you can't allow your government to convince you that people thousands of miles away that never did anything to you are your enemy, and you have the right to go into their countries and kill them. And so that has stayed with me for all of these years. And I've seen the devastating effects of U.S. policy. I was in Iraq right before the U.S. invaded and realized that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and that this was another big lie we were being told. Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And to see the consequences, I've been to Afghanistan, to Yemen, to all of these places where the U.S. has been intervening. And when you see the real victims of these policies, it's not just some abstract thing anymore of statistics, it's real people. And I feel disgusted about how my country has acted in the world. And even the way Joe Biden now talks about the U.S. has to regain its place at the head of the table. I mean, what is that? They say if the U.S. is not at the head of the table, there's going to be chaos. Well, with the U.S. at the head of the table, there has been chaos. And so we have to get beyond that whole mindset that the U.S. somehow has moral authority and even the ability to control things around the world, and go into a new mindset where we sit at a round table. We discuss these issues all together. We come up with global solutions. We use the United Nations. We stop any kind of unilateral interventions. And we lift these devastating sanctions that are another form of war that are affecting the lives of 80 million people in Iran, that are keeping people from getting food and medicines in Venezuela, that are starving people in places around the world. Cuba, look at that island nation of 11 million people that we have been trying to strangle since the revolution in 1959. So we just have to change our foreign policy, and I am totally passionate about moving beyond this imperial policy to one in which we are a humble nation. I wish we would stop saying we are the best country in the world. We are a good country. We're not the best country. We have to be better, and we have to recognize that there are other players in the world like China, and they should not be our enemy. We have to cooperate on climate. We have to cooperate on COVID and other health issues, and we can't go around the world searching enemies to destroy, because we don't destroy them and they shouldn't be our enemies.
And Medea, do you consider yourself to be a patriot?
In some ways, yes, because I love my country. In other ways, no, because I feel like I'm a global citizen and I don't like this idea of these arbitrary borders that have been created over the years that keep people from getting access to employment, keep people from seeing their family members, keep people now from getting access to a COVID vaccine. So I don't particularly like nation states.
Medea, it's so great to have you and your perspective today. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me on. I love your show.
My pleasure. Thank you. And we'll have more rising for you after this.